Hi, welcome to another Colors of Prog. This is season 4, episode 13. So today I picked two recordings from Emerson, Lake and Palmer, much mentioned by myself over the years on this program. But when I mentioned them, I discussed bands. I could hear some elements of ELP's music or style. Uh, but I discovered that I rarely actually tackle Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. So I went back and I picked out one here and I picked out one here. And I said, well, it's time to talk about the LP. Now, Emerson, Lake, and Palmer were progressive rock legends in the early 70s that famously stumbled near the end of that decade, disbanding in 1979, reuniting in 91, 98, 91 through 98, and 2010 again. Their first four albums, the self-titled debut was released in 1970. Tarkus was released in 71, Trilogy in 72, and the one I'm going to discuss today, one of the two, is Brain Salad Surgery from 73. Um, it's some of the most original music released in the classic rock era and the classic days of progressive rock, a highlight that period. Um, it's an unusual sound, experimental electronic experimentation with keyboard sounds and manipulation of keyboard sounds, what you could do, going past what was the norm. I mean, generally, ELP, there really were not, prior to them, many bands playing music like that. Equal parts bombast, classical, sometimes chaotic sounding, often orchestral, and at points they played with an orchestra, augmenting their sound on albums, on record, and occasionally live. I'm sure it was Break the Bank touring with an orchestra, so I think they did it on selected dates. Um, Keith Emerson had come from the classical psychedelic pop band The Nice, which kind of lost their pop rock sound when David O'List departed after their first album. They only had one more, Ars Longa Vita Brevis, I believe it's called, in 1968. Before outtakes and live material, mostly from Fillmore East shows, um, were the remaining lineup. Greg Lake had come from King Crimson, specifically their self-titled debut and 1970s Lark's Tongue and Aspic. Carl Palmer went from the touring band of Arthur Brown's The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, although he did not appear on the 1968 debut album, Crazy World of Arthur Brown, he toured with them. Vince Crane was a keyboard player with Arthur Brown's band. I believe he's on the album Crazy World. And both Carl Palmer and Vince Crane left to form Atomic Rooster, which has a sound akin to ELP, but not really. Atomic Rooster are a bit hard to categorize. They're a heavy band, elements of R&B, psychedelia, maybe some Canterbury leanings. Even Cole Palmer left after the 1970 debut of Atomic Rooster. So, catching up to ELP again. So, Brain Salad Surgery, fourth album, and probably the most famously known, from the ahead of its time H.R. Giger designed fold-out gatefold sleeve. Yes, this one. And this is an original, by the way. A original, yes. And it opened up to look like that. And believe it or not, it came with a fold-out poster. And here, and it opens up quite large, actually. And it lists the songs. And primarily, there's only 3 people credited performing on this, but I assume a lot of overdubs. We also have lyrics on the back of this, and it's kind of a cool thing. The other thing that was nice about finding the original in my collection is, if you remember, albums used to come with these little this was on Manticore. An ELP at this point in time had a subsidiary label called Manticore on Atlantic Records. And they were, if it's not well known, but they were really, when they started out ELP, they toured Europe a lot, especially Italy. And they really got to know bands like Banco, PFM, and others. And those 2 bands in particular, their first English language debut albums, not their first albums, but their first English language debut albums were released on Manticore in the United States and the UK. So ELP and Keith Emerson in particular, and actually all 3 of these guys from what I've read, were so much into the Italian Prog sound, they assisted them trying to break them here. So you have this brings back the memories sleeve. So talked about the fold out H.R. Giger gatefold, the sleeve. So why is brain salad surgery so well remembered and so well regarded? It's pretty much a dazzling display of interweaving, colliding musical genres. Jerusalem still astounds with its use of church organ. And that sounds even heavier at the time of Yes era Rick Wakeman, Stage 1. Toccata is a track that spotlights Cole Palmer and the tubular bells, steel drums. A toccata creates a clashing sound, but also hints at how much of this music was created in the studio via overdubs. Still, you can't fault that. You only have 3 guys. If anyone else assisted, they're not credited. Still You Turn Me On is the Greg Lake Showcase, a warm vocal, not unlike something he had sung in the early Crimson. And ELP The Van famously vetoed its release as a single, Still You Turn Me On. ELP at the time thought it would give a different interpretation of the band and didn't represent what they thought they sounded like. Although it was famously brought out for live shows, in a slower moment, Still You Turn Me On, the song, they didn't want it released as a single. And it would have been huge, I think. Karn, Evil, and its 4-part interpretation, first impression part 2, third impression, and so on. It's an heavy music, more than likely the heaviest music ever recorded in progressive rock. Now, ELP attracted the acid crowd, the stoner crowd, as well as the more genteel hardcore prog crowd. Those are the guys that were digging more symphonic music. So, yes, for example. And ELP did a lot of extensive touring. And then it led to a break in 1977. And when they reconvened, no, led to a break prior to 77, sorry. And when they reconvened, they released Works, Volume 1. Now, it's rather thick, fold out. By that time, with the band posing for introspective photos, is Keith Emerson and Greg, Carl Palmer. So you almost would think it's a 3-album set, but no, it's only a 2-record set. Two pieces of vinyl. I don't know. I don't have Works on compact disc, so I can't tell you how that worked out to be. No pun intended. But what is going on is that side 1, it's sort of like the band didn't know how to do solo albums. I don't know. They decided they didn't want to do solo albums after their short break. If everyone recalls, around this time period, Yes took a break, the band Yes, and a lot of the members in that band did do solo albums to varying degrees of success. So, in this case, Works, Volume 1, Side 1 is Keith Emerson Piano Concerto No. 1. But it's not really, because it's Keith going nuts again with a variety of sounds, mainly classical. Side 2 is all Greg Legg, but Keith and Carl Palmer play on that. Lend Me Your Love Tonight, C.S. Levy, or C'est La Vie. And side 3 is Carl Palmer, with a variety of assistance from other musicians, doing his thing, and I'll get to side 4 in a minute. So, even accompaniment by a full orchestra had been attempted on recordings by the Moody Blues and Deep Purple, for example. But as I said earlier, ELP would use them sparingly in the studio and sometimes live. So as I mentioned, this is split into halves, and then half the first album, the length of this series of classically influenced concerto movements, but not, because it's very electronic too. That's Keith's thing. That was his side. Greg Lake, as I mentioned, has a side, 5 songs with that familiar deep voice, C'est La Vie being the big highlight. And later, a concert staple for ELP, and even for himself as a solo artist. The second album, side 1, is Carl Palmer, or percussion-oriented, but 2 of the tunes are obviously influenced by Emerson, because there's allegedly, it says it's Carl Palmer's interpretation of a Bach song and a Prokofiev song. I think I screwed that one up. So side 2 of the second album, or side 4, however you're looking at it, features new and all too familiar band interpretation of an Aaron Copland composition, Fanfare for a Common Man, and a full orchestra version of Pirates, a heady tune co-written by early Crimson lyricist Pete Sinfield. So, it's funny, Fanfare for the Common Man, once you hear it, it famously, or infamously, was used in stadiums, sports games, pre-recorded versions were played prior to Rolling Stones tour of Europe in 1975, 76. That was played, the overture, before the band took the stage. So it was quite well known. Here's the thing, though. In 1977, when Works Volume 1 came out, punk was becoming dominant in the UK, and disco began to become popular all around, especially in the US. Pardon me. Even the singer-songwriter phase, with smooth vocals, began to edge out the stadium rock era sounds of the early 70s. So, where did that leave ELP on this particular record? It's like more than some of their later albums. Still, it's an accomplished, if I would have to say, schizophrenic album, lacking the electronic experimentation of at least the previous 3 albums. For example, Brain Salad Surgery. But all in all, it's possibly the really last good studio album, his Works. So I covered today ELP, Works, and Brain Salad Surgery. And if you weren't sure what it's called, for those that don't know, you could go on YouTube or search Google, put my name, Lewis Paul, interviews Keith Emerson. I did interview Keith in 2012 for about an hour, live on stage. I was very gracious. It was one of the highlights. I've interviewed a number of actors, actresses, and musicians over the years. That was a very good one. And it was a great experience. And so if you're interested in watching that, that's out there. One of these days, I'll get around to putting a link in the comment section of this video when it goes up. So thank you for watching. Yeah, it was nice to give ELP some love. I believe in the past I may have mentioned and discussed an Emerson solo album or soundtrack work. He's done a lot of soundtrack work. And it was the first time, I believe, that I covered ELP, because I've always said, well, these guys sound, have that influence, etc. Hope you liked the show. Come back again. Thank you.